At the heart of Preston Music Conservatory, with its soaring ceilings, gleaming marble columns, and the delicate echoes of Chopin drifting from distant practice rooms, there moved a woman no one ever truly saw. Her name was Emily Johnson. She was 28, wore a faded beige uniform, and her worn-out sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floors as she worked. She wasn't a student, not a musician on scholarship, not a donor, not even a teacher. She was the custodian, a quiet, humble presence who emptied trash bins, wiped fingerprints off glass, and polished handrails no one noticed unless they were smudged. People passed her every day, eyes sliding right past her, as if she were part of the furniture. But if anyone had looked a little closer, they might have noticed something different about her. The way she moved, with a kind of silent grace, a rhythm to her steps, almost like choreography. She never rushed, never fumbled. Every motion was calm, precise, and oddly elegant. And then there was that moment, brief but telling, when she paused by the grand piano in the main reception hall. She didn't touch it. She simply stood still for a second, looking at its polished surface. In the reflection of a nearby brass lamp, she saw herself, faint, small, but staring at the instrument with something between longing and sorrow. For just a moment, the mask slipped, and behind her quiet composure, you could see it. There was a story here. A past buried under silence and routine. And whatever it was, it had something to do with the piano. But before the thought could linger, she shook her head slightly and returned to her work, fading once again into the background, just like she always did. Emily's world was one of shadows, silent halls before the day began, forgotten corridors, and the steady rhythm of tasks no one noticed but always expected to be done. In stark contrast stood women like Victoria Parker, the conservatory's director. At 53, Victoria moved through the building with sharp heels and sharper authority. Her silver bob was always immaculate, her navy suits tailored to perfection. She didn't ask, she ordered. And when she spoke, it was with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Then there was Samantha Reed, the conservatory's star piano instructor. Younger, colder, and more openly cruel. Samantha had built a reputation on producing winners, and she carried herself like royalty. She didn't see people, only performances. And to her, Emily was nothing more than background noise. They rarely called her by name. To them, she was the staff, the help, a presence to be managed, corrected, dismissed. When Victoria needed the reception chairs perfectly spaced for the Jefferson Foundation Board visit, she barely glanced at Emily while barking the order. And when Samantha spotted her during a practice session, she made sure to remind Victoria, in a voice just loud enough, that the staff should really use the service corridors. We can't have them in sight when guests arrive. Emily didn't flinch. Her face stayed calm, her hands steady. But inside, each little cut left a mark. Later that day, as she cleaned near one of the smaller practice rooms, she heard the frustrated notes of a young student struggling at the piano. A girl, no older than 12, kept stumbling over the same passage, her fingers stiff with tension. Without meaning to, Emily whispered, "Try releasing your wrist more on the arpeggios." The girl turned, surprised. But before anything else could be said, Samantha appeared in the doorway. Her voice was cold, sharp as ice. "Did you just try to instruct my student?" Emily took a step back. "I'm sorry, You just what?" Samantha's laugh cut through the air. "Thought your expertise as a janitor made you qualified to teach piano?" The door closed with a snap, shutting Emily out. Her cheeks flushed, but she didn't cry. She didn't break. Instead, as she moved back to her duties, she paused at the grand staircase and placed her hand on the brass railing. Her fingers, almost unconsciously, began to move, tracing out the notes the student had been struggling with. Each note silent, but perfectly placed. Her hands moved with the fluidity of someone who had once known the keys intimately. Not just from study, but from love. No one saw, no one heard, and yet, in that quiet, private moment, the truth rang out clear. She still had the music. She always had. The night of the annual fundraising gala arrived with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for red carpets, and grand unveilings. The conservatory sparkled under crystal chandeliers, every inch scrubbed to perfection, thanks in no small part to Emily, who had worked quietly for hours ensuring the space gleamed. Wealthy patrons were already beginning to arrive, draped in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, their names etched on donor plaques and program covers. This night wasn't just a performance. It was a performance for power, for money, for reputation. At the center of the evening's program was a highly anticipated piano performance by Olivia Sanders, one of the conservatory's rising stars. She was the crown jewel of Samantha Reed's teaching roster, a polished prodigy, handpicked to impress the Jefferson Foundation, whose funding could decide the future of the school's programs. Then the phone call came. Samantha burst through the double doors. Phone pressed to her ear, her face pale and tight. Her voice echoed across the marble floor, sharp with disbelief. "What do you mean you're in the hospital? The gala starts in an hour, Olivia." She stopped, listening. Her expression darkened. "Food poisoning? Today? Of all days?" She ended the call without another word, her hands shaking. Victoria was at her side in an instant, sensing the emergency. "What happened?" she demanded. "Olivia can't perform," Samantha hissed. "She's in the emergency room." Victoria's hand flew to the pearls at her throat. "But she's our centerpiece. The Jefferson Foundation requested list specifically for her." "I know," Samantha snapped, her voice low but urgent. "None of my other students can handle that piece. Not with no notice." The mood shifted. A ripple of unease spread through the room. For a moment, the gleaming grandeur of the evening dulled under the weight of panic. They had no pianist, no replacement, and nearly 100 high-profile guests arriving by the minute. Behind them, Emily stood near the entrance, dusting a display case. She wasn't watching, at least not directly, but she heard every word, and she knew the piece. As the panic swirled around them, faculty and staff whispering urgently in corners, one voice spoke up, soft, hesitant, but firm enough to cut through the noise. It was Jason Miller, a young teaching assistant with a quiet demeanor and kind eyes. Unlike most, he always greeted Emily with a nod, a good morning, or a simple thank you when she passed. He wasn't loud, but he noticed things. And now, as the gala teetered on the edge of disaster, he stepped forward. "Mrs. Parker," he said carefully, "if I might make a suggestion." Victoria turned toward him, her expression sharp with urgency. "What is it, Jason?" He hesitated, then nodded toward the edge of the room, toward Emily, who was quietly dusting a nearby display case, seemingly unaware of the chaos. "I've heard someone else play that piece. Quite brilliantly, actually. For Liszt, Victoria Fronith. Professor Williams is out of town, and none of the graduate students are ready. Who are you suggesting?" Jason took a breath. "Emily." The silence that followed was instant and heavy. Samantha was the first to react. A sharp, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. "The janitor?" she scoffed. "You can't be serious." Jason stood his ground. "I've heard her play. Late at night, when she thought the building was empty. It was Liszt. It was stunning." Victoria and Samantha exchanged looks, a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Then, slowly, they turned to Emily. She had frozen in place, her duster still in hand. Her eyes were wide, caught like a deer in headlights. Victoria spoke first. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice clipped. "You play piano?" Emily lowered the duster and nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am." Samantha's tone turned mocking. "And you think you can play Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody? Tonight? In front of donors?" There was a long pause. Then, for the first time in 3 years, Emily met Samantha's eyes directly. "Yes," she said quietly, but clearly. "I can." For a moment, no one spoke. Emily's quiet declaration hung in the air, challenging the assumptions that had surrounded her for years. Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was steady, unshaken, and that alone shifted something in the room. Victoria studied her carefully, eyes narrowing. There was a pause, calculating, thoughtful. You could almost see the wheels turning behind her composed expression. Then, slowly, her lips curved into something resembling a smile. "Well," she said with an air of rehearsed charm. "This is certainly unexpected." Samantha crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "We're seriously considering this," she whispered to Victoria and Richard Taylor, the chairman of the board, who had quietly approached the conversation. "She's a janitor." Victoria didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked to Richard, then back at Emily. A new gleam had entered her eyes. Not respect, not yet, but opportunity. She turned slightly toward Samantha and lowered her voice, though not quite low enough for Emily not to hear. "If she's terrible," Victoria murmured, "we spin it as a last-minute emergency solution. Maybe even a little humor to lighten the mood. If she's passable, we present it as a charming community outreach success." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "And if she's actually good?" Victoria shrugged. "Then we're visionaries who gave talent a chance, regardless of background. It's a win either way." Emily stood motionless, absorbing every word. They weren't asking her, they were using her. A novelty, a sideshow, something to control. Then came the final blow. Victoria turned to her fully now, smiling, but this time her voice carried a sharp edge wrapped in silk. "So, Emily," she said sweetly, "you'll play tonight? One piece. Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody. And if I refuse?" Emily asked, her voice low. Victoria's smile didn't fade. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to reconsider your position here. Budget cuts, you understand." In that moment, everything narrowed. The chandeliers, the patrons, the glittering gowns, they all faded into the background. This wasn't just about a performance anymore. This was about dignity, about choice, about reclaiming a part of herself that she'd been forced to bury. Emily lifted her chin, meeting Victoria's gaze without flinching. "I'll play," she said quietly. The lights in the grand reception hall dimmed slightly as Victoria Parker stepped onto the stage, her practiced smile gleaming under the glow of the chandelier. She tapped the microphone once, twice, and her voice rang out with polished poise. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "we've had a slight change to our program tonight. Our scheduled pianist, Olivia Sanders, has suffered a sudden illness and cannot perform." A polite murmur passed through the audience, disappointment, confusion. But Victoria continued, her tone now theatrical. "In the spirit of community outreach, we've prepared a special alternative performance, a demonstration that music truly lives in every corner of our conservatory." That was her cue. Emily stepped out from behind the curtain. The room went still. She wasn't wearing a gown. She wasn't announced with accolades. She walked onto that stage in the same beige uniform she'd worn for 3 years. Sensible shoes, a plain name tag pinned neatly over her heart. Emily J. A few scattered laughs floated up from the back rows, soft but cruel. People leaned in, whispering behind their hands. Samantha stood near the curtain, arms folded, a smirk playing at the edge of her lips like she was watching a prank about to unfold. Even Richard Taylor, the board chair, leaned toward his companion with a bemused whisper. "Well, this should be interesting." Emily said nothing. She crossed the stage quietly and sat down at the grand Steinway piano. Its polished black surface reflected her face, nervous, pale, exposed. Her hands trembled slightly above the keys. She closed her eyes. The lights, the whispers, the judgment, they all began to fade. In her mind, she was no longer in a conservatory full of skeptics. She was 10 years old again, sitting on a creaky bench beside her grandmother. That same grandmother with arthritis-twisted fingers who had once played with symphonies and told her something she never forgot. "Music isn't about who you are to the world," her grandmother had said, gently guiding her hand over the keys. "It's about who you are when the world falls away." Emily let out a slow, steady breath. And then, she began to play. The first note rang out like a spark in the dark. It wasn't timid. It wasn't unsure. It was bold, precise, and full of life. Then came the second, then the third, and suddenly, the hall that had moments ago been filled with whispers and laughter was silent. Not a polite silence, a stunned one. Emily's fingers moved with a confidence that defied everything they'd assumed about her. The music didn't just play, it soared. The opening of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 unfolded with breathtaking clarity, every note alive with intent. Her hands danced across the keys, fluid and powerful, as if the instrument had been waiting years to be played like this. It wasn't just skill, it was soul. Her body moved with the rhythm, swaying gently as the tempo shifted from delicate to thunderous and back again. She captured every nuance, every flicker of emotion the composer had once poured into the page. There was whimsy in the lighter passages, heartbreak in the minor tones, and fury in the crescendos. The music wasn't coming from her hands. It was pouring out of her entire being. In the third row, an elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. At the back of the hall, a renowned music critic leaned forward, his mouth slightly open, stunned by what he was hearing. Samantha's smirk had vanished. Her arms were no longer crossed. She stood rigid, white-knuckled, barely breathing. Jason, watching from the wings, felt vindication bloom in his chest. And when Emily struck the final, thunderous chord, the sound echoed through the marble hall like a declaration. Then silence. 3 full heartbeats of stunned stillness. And then the room exploded. Applause rose like a wave, slow at first, then crashing into a full standing ovation. Cries of "Bravo!" filled the air, bouncing off the chandeliers and polished stone. Guests who had moments before prepared to laugh politely were now on their feet, faces shining with genuine awe. Emily didn't bask in it. She didn't gloat or bow dramatically. She simply sat there for a moment, breathless and still, her hands resting gently in her lap. Then she stood, gave a small, humble bow, and the applause only grew louder. She wasn't just good, she was unforgettable. As the applause thundered on, a man in the front row stood and made his way to the stage. He was tall, dignified, and immediately recognizable to anyone in the world of classical music. David Thompson, the acclaimed conductor and guest of honor that evening. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and wonder. He stepped up to the edge of the stage and raised his voice just enough to be heard above the fading cheers. "Where did you study?" he asked, eyes locked on Emily. She turned to face him, still catching her breath, her cheeks flushed with emotion. The room quieted again, eager to hear her answer. "I didn't," she said softly. "Not formally." David blinked, confused. "That's impossible. Your technique, your interpretation." Emily looked down at the piano for a moment, then back at him. "My grandmother taught me," she said. "Margaret Johnson." The name hit the room like a sudden gust of wind. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Murmurs rose. People exchanged glances. Margaret Johnson wasn't just a name, she was a legend. A concert pianist who had once toured with the National Symphony in the 1970s. A woman known for both her brilliance and her heartbreaking early retirement from the spotlight. David's eyes widened. "Margaret Johnson," he repeated, now with recognition. "She played Rachmaninoff like no one else I've ever heard." Emily nodded. "She raised me after my parents died. We didn't have the money for conservatory tuition, but she taught me everything she knew." Victoria Parker, who had reappeared near the stage, tried to step in with a smile. Well, what a fascinating discovery. A wonderful little human interest story. But Emily cut her off gently. "It's not a story," she said. "It's my life." Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I was accepted to Juilliard," she continued, turning her gaze to Samantha now. 15 years ago. But my grandmother had a stroke the same week I got the letter. I stayed to take care of her. By the time she passed, we were drowning in medical bills. And the opportunity was gone. There was no bitterness in her voice, only truth. Simple, steady, unapologetic. David Thompson nodded slowly, visibly moved. This wasn't a tale of missed chances. It was a testament to devotion, to sacrifice, to a love of music that hadn't faded, even in the face of hardship. It wasn't a story of failure. It was a story of a woman who had never stopped playing. Just no one had been listening, until now. As the room buzzed with renewed excitement, guests eager to shake Emily's hand, to ask her questions, to simply be near the woman who had just shattered every assumption, Victoria Parker moved quickly through the crow. her smile as polished as ever. "Yes, of course we recognized her potential," she said smoothly to a major donor. "Our community outreach programs are designed precisely to nurture hidden talent like this. It's part of our mission to ensure no voice is overlooked." She said it as if it had all been planned, as if Emily's performance had been the result of careful foresight, not desperation and an almost dismissal. But despite her words, something about her tone rang hollow. Her charm now felt like a costume she was struggling to keep buttoned. Meanwhile, Samantha stood off to the side, near the refreshment table, isolated and silent. The usual circle of admirers that surrounded her after every gala had drifted away, pulled instead toward the woman in the janitor's uniform who had just outplayed every one of Samantha's students. Her expression was unreadable, but her stillness spoke volumes. Across the room, Emily remained where she was, surrounded now by people who moments ago had barely seen her. They spoke to her with respect, with awe, but she didn't bask in it. She accepted their praise with the same quiet grace she had carried her duster and trash bin, grateful, steady, humble. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She had simply been herself. Jason Miller made his way to her side, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to her with a quiet smile. "I told you they'd be amazed," he said softly. Emily looked at him, her eyes still wide with everything that had just happened. "Thank you," she replied. Not many people would have spoken up. He gave a small shrug, but his eyes were proud. Some truths are too big to keep hidden forever. In that moment, standing in a room that had once looked right through her, Emily wasn't just the woman who had saved the gala. She was the woman who had reminded them all what real talent looked like, and what quiet resilience it could become when finally given a voice. As the crowd slowly began to settle, a new figure approached, poised, purposeful, and clearly someone of importance. It was Elizabeth Chun, the head of the Jefferson Foundation, the very organization whose funding could shape the conservatory's future. Her reputation preceded her, brilliant, discerning, and not easily impressed. She stopped in front of Emily, who was still gripping her glass of water, her hands not quite steady, her mind still catching up with the night's events. "Miss Johnson," Elizabeth began, her voice calm but direct, "your performance tonight was extraordinary, not just in skill but in heart." Emily tried to respond, but found herself at a rare loss for words. She gave a small nod, grateful but unsure where this was going. Elizabeth continued, "Our foundation believes that talent should never be limited by circumstance. We've been searching for someone to lead a new initiative, one focused on bringing music education to underprivileged youth. Someone who understands both musical excellence and the barriers that keep it out of reach for too many." David Thompson stepped forward beside her, adding, "It would involve teaching, mentoring, and occasional performances. But more than that, you'd be giving kids like you once were a chance to believe they belong in places like this." Emily stared at them, stunned. Just hours ago, she had been wiping down brass railings and arranging chairs under sharp instructions. Now, she was being asked to lead a program to inspire others to step fully into the music she had once thought she'd lost forever. It was overwhelming, but as she looked around the room, at the people who now truly saw her, at the students who watched her with wide, hopeful eyes, she felt something deeper than surprise. She felt purpose. This wasn't just an opportunity, it was a calling. And somehow, despite everything, she knew this was what she was meant to do. 3 months later, the halls of the Preston Music Conservatory looked the same. Sunlight streaming through tall windows, the faint echo of piano scales drifting from behind practice room doors, the polished marble floors still gleaming beneath careful footsteps. But something had changed. Emily walked those same corridors, no longer in her beige uniform, no longer carrying a duster or pushing a cleaning cart. Instead, she held a folder of sheet music tucked under one arm, her pace calm, confident. The name tag was gone, but her presence had never felt more certain. Now, when people passed her, they looked her in the eye. They greeted her by name. Her life hadn't transformed into a fairy tale. There was no overnight fame, no grand mansion waiting at the end of a red carpet. But what she had now was far more meaningful. Purpose, direction, a second chance not just to play, but to pour her heart into something that mattered. She spent her days working with children who reminded her of herself. Quiet, overlooked, often told they didn't belong in places like this. Kids who had raw talent, but no access. Who didn't know if their dreams were foolish or just too far away. With patience and warmth, she taught them more than music. She taught them resilience, the kind that had carried her through years of silence. In the evenings, when the building quieted again, she would sometimes slip into the small practice room near the stairwell, the one where she'd once been scolded for speaking. Now, no one stopped her. No one laughed. She played not to impress or prove anything. She played because music had always been who she was. And this time, the world was finally listening. Talent doesn't always come wrapped in a prestigious degree or a glittering title. It doesn't always announce itself from center stage. Sometimes it lingers quietly in the background, hidden in plain sight, in the hands that polish the floors, in the hearts that no one ever stops to ask about. Emily's story is a powerful reminder that greatness isn't reserved for the chosen few. It can live in the overlooked, the underestimated, the invisible. All it takes is one moment, one chance for the world to finally see what was there all along. So let me ask you, have you ever been underestimated? Has someone ever looked right past you, not realizing what you were capable of? Or maybe you've witnessed someone surprise the world with a brilliance no one expected. If you have, we want to hear it. Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the most inspiring truths come from the people no one thought to listen to. And if Emily's journey touched your heart, help us share it. Like this video, subscribe to our channel. Pass it on to someone who might need the reminder that their story still matters, that their talent still counts, even if no one's seen it yet. Because the world is full of hidden music, we just have to start listening.